Stakeholder.
In gambling, an independent party with whom each of those who make a wager deposits the money or counters wager.
A person with an interest or concern in something, especially a business.
In emergency management, any person or entity with a vested interest in the survival and recovery of a given community. You.
Welcome to Stakeholder Prepping.
Welcome back to Stakeholder Prepping, where you are the stakeholder in your own survival. We are your hosts. My name is Chris.
And I'm AC. And today we are going to go over some alternative methods for you to, find where you are and how to navigate, even if you don't have a map or a compass. These are like kind of your navigational tips and tricks kind of stuff, And this is actually kind of fun. I'll be honest, Chris, I feel like we're kind of phoning this one in. We just sort of threw this together, but it's only because the next episode is going to be so insanely awesome that we have to have a little bit of a letdown episode, I think.
I don't feel like it's going to be a letdown because we did get a whole bunch of feedback from our land navigation episode.
This is kind of a feedback episode. You're exactly right. This is what the people want. Maybe it's just not up to snuff of what I want, but you're right. This is what the people are asking for.
Maybe they just saw the YouTube video of episode 15 and me explaining how land navigation works on a map with a compass, and they just wanted more to kind of push our limits and see what we could find.
I bet that's it. Yeah.
This is going to be actually, I think, a really fun episode because this is more detail on the different ways that you can find your way without your navigation supplies. You get cut off from them, or you're not home when something happens and you need to figure out which way is which, or you're in a strange country, or you're in a strange city, anything along those lines. So we did put in some research and we came up with a bunch of different methods that you can use to find your way, whether the sun is shining or not.
Yeah, I think this is going to be the celestial navigation or, different methods of identifying north or south or all this really kind of neat stuff that we found. And it's funny, like one of my buddies says stuff like this. He calls them dad facts, where they're things that aren't really like necessarily like verifiable. It's just like shit your dad told you. And you're like, well, I guess it's got to be true. So yeah.
That makes sense.
I'm kind of excited about this, though. I think this is one of those things that, it really can go a long way.
Was that a navigation joke this early in the episode?
Inadvertently, maybe it was. But yeah, this actually may go fairly quickly. I mean, there's a lot of stuff we've kind of put pen to paper on here, but I don't know. Yeah, let's just get into it and see how long this takes. But I think there's some fun stuff. Some of this actually, when I originally wanted to do some of this, you actually gave me the idea for this episode by talking about some like the, hey, if I know what time it is and I use my fingers and point at the sun and all that kind of stuff, I think you're actually going to explain what you meant by that. So why don't you go ahead with some of the, I'm looking at the sun, how do I know where I am stuff?
Sounds good. And all of these, if you think about them and actually stop for a second and put your mind to, well, why would that work? It's going to make sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, these all make sense. I think they're things that, people just don't think of or don't know about, or because of technology, we don't have to care.
And so much of this is old school. When we're talking like way old school Viking era navigation techniques that still applies and is still applicable today. It's not like it just disappeared with the magnetic compass.
Yeah, sure.
You can still find your way. And I mean, one of the easy ways is identifying where the midday sun is, right? So midday sun, I'll see you in the town square at high noon, and we're going to duel.
At high noon for a duel.
High noon was local noon. So by celestial navigation, it is local noon when the sun is at its highest point in the sky. That changes as the seasons pass, so local noon is always going to be when it's highest in the sky, even though it may not be 12 o'clock on the dot. That being said, in the northern hemisphere, the sun is generally south at noon because we have the sun around our equator, plus or minus 23.5 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, if you can see the sun and you have an idea of what time it is, you can actually watch and see where your local noon is. It's going to be the highest point in the sky. That's going to be south if you're in the northern hemisphere. If you're in the southern hemisphere, depending on the season, that may be a little bit more difficult to determine which direction is north, just based on how local noon works in the southern hemisphere with
You're
it
talking
tipping
about
away.
because the axis of the Earth really leans a certain way. It's not like it's equal in north and south, right?
Precisely. And it's one of those things where you can kind of determine based on the season. So in the southern hemisphere, like we do have listeners in Australia, I'm sure that they can tell you during winter it is blazing hot down there. During the northern hemisphere winter is their summer, and it is blazing hot. You get kangaroos eating people and don't know which
Don't you
way is
mean it's
which.
bloody hot there, mate?
Aye.
Aye. It's
Throw
bloody
the
hot.
roux on the bobby.
Oh, the roux on the bobby.
But generally, if you can identify local noon, you're going to be able to determine north or south. Keep in mind, when you're giving directions, don't say like, yeah, go that way and then hang a right.
Mm-hmm.
Actually use your cardinal directions. Go north
Right.
for 2 blocks and then hang a right, go east for 3
Oh,
blocks.
right. Yeah.
Makes it a lot easier to communicate precise directions or more precise directions without GPS, map and compass,
Yep.
any of those land nav
Sure.
tactics. If you can't necessarily determine, all right, which way is or what is local noon, I can't stare at the sun all day because I'll burn out my retinas. How do I determine which way is which? Well, a stick will do that for you. A stick, a pencil, a pen, a grease pencil. That's the
the
word I'm
grease
thinking
pencil.
of.
The
Grease
shadow
pencil.
stick. Use the
Yes.
shadow stick.
The shadow stick. So what you
Tell
do
us how the
is
shadow stick works.
all it takes is a stick, some sort of straight object in the ground, and you can prop it up if you need to, but it has to create a shadow. And so you're going to basically put that stick in one spot, mark where the end of the shadow is, right?
Mhm.
And then you wait 15, 20 minutes and then mark where the new shadow tip is. So the line connecting the two marks generally is going to point east to west, with the first mark
Oh.
indicating west. So, and that does kind of depend on, again, your latitude. How close to the equator are you?
Sure.
But if you're marking where you are on the sun, you're basically creating a sundial that
Right.
you're just getting direction off of.
Got it. Okay.
And
Yeah,
if
that
you're in the
makes
southern
sense.
hemisphere, it's a little obviously everything is kind of designed for that northern hemisphere listener. But if you mark off one point and then 15, 20, 30 minutes later, mark off another point, you can draw a line between them, and that is your east-west. Now you can get your north-south off of it.
Wow. Yeah. So it is just sort of like a rudimentary sundial, but you're not using it for time. You're simply using it for cardinal direction.
Bingo. Super easy. Doesn't take that long. You can do it while you're setting up camp just to get your bearings.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be invaluable if you do have to evacuate that campsite, or if you're just trying to figure out which direction to go. It's really easy. Doesn't take a whole lot of time or effort. You just have to come back and check which way is which.
That's a cool one. What else you got?
Speaking of time, let's talk about analog watch faces.
Okay. And you like to carry the analog watch, don't you? I've got a digital watch, but yeah, you do have an analog watch on you most days, don't you?
I do.
Mhm.
Mine is radio controlled by the Naval Observatory, so it is constantly getting updated with the precise time.
Mm-hmm.
And it does have the E6B flight computer scales on it, so I can do whatever I need to if I happen to take over your job and go flying.
Yep. Yeah, sure. Yep. You
I can
do
land
some-
the airplane because
you-
a crash landing is considered a landing.
anything you can walk away from is a good landing.
I can't guarantee that I'm going to walk. But anyways, using an analog watch face
Mm-hmm.
to determine your direction. This is kind of a multi-step process, but it goes quickly and it is effective. If you point the hour hand, regardless of what time it is, as long as that time on the watch is correct, if you point the hour hand at the sun, halfway between the hour hand and the 12 o'clock position is south. Now, if you're using daylight savings time, it's halfway between the 12 o'clock and the or halfway between the hour hand and the 1 o'clock position.
No kidding.
Yep. If you, at 9 o'clock in the morning, if you can see the sun, go out
Mm-hmm.
with your analog watch
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of stand there with it parallel to the ground,
Yep.
line up that 9 o'clock hour hand with the sun, and then find the halfway point between your 9 o'clock position and your 12 o'clock positions. You're right about 10:30. That's south.
Wow. Interesting. That's a really
And
cool one. I'd never ever even thought of that.
it's it's one of those handy little things that I picked up. I don't remember where, I don't remember when. I think I've known that since I was like a teenager, but it was one of those odd things that just stuck with me. And yeah, I looked it up and confirmed it. Every single bit of it is true. And I checked it today before we started recording
Yeah.
at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
And so,
And yep, it's south.
that's interesting. And then what was the other one? You had mentioned something the last episode about like if you hold your hand out and like you can count on your fingers basically how much daylight is left by looking at the sun or something. How does that work?
Yeah, this has been around since like ancient Sumerian times, I
Since
believe.
fingers? Is it as old as
Yes,
fingers?
pretty much as old as
Got it.
fingers. So
Got it.
possibly older than dirt in some cases.
Now, are all thumbs fingers, but not all fingers thumbs?
That's the way I learned it,
Okay,
but
got
I
it.
am learning that everything I learned, math, science, history in school is apparently wrong
All
because they
wrong.
do it so wrong now.
They do it so wrong now. No, that's exactly right. It's all relative. So, all right. So, how do you? Tell me the thing with the fingers and the 15 minutes and stuff.
So if you are holding your hand up at arm's length and you kind of have to put it out and lay it so that your fingers are stacked on top of each other parallel to the ground. So you're going to
Mm-hmm.
line up kind of your pinky to the horizon and then line up your fingers over the top of that. And you're counting how many fingers you have between the horizon and the sun. Okay. So for
Okay.
every finger that is in there, that's approximately 15 minutes. So if you only have 3 fingers of space between the horizon and the sun, you have about 45 minutes of daylight remaining to set up camp. If you stack both hands on top of each other and you
I
can
was
get
just gonna ask.
all 8 in there, you've got 2 hours of sunlight left.
So it works even if you stack all 8 fingers up. It
It
still
does.
works.
It
Interesting.
doesn't really work when you get more than 2 hours because we are really bad at keeping one hand in place and moving the other over the top without a reference point.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay.
So what you end up doing is giving yourself more time because as soon as you move one hand from the horizon to on top of the other, you're going to push
Yeah.
down and give yourself more time. So
Oh,
maximum of 2 hours if you're going to use that method, but it does work and it's pretty accurate. I won't say it's, down to the second or anything like
yeah,
that, but
sure.
it gives you a time frame for how long you have to set up camp, you know, get the fire started so you can
Right.
start cooking dinner. Do you have time to go out and check your trap lines? Do you have time to do one more cast and pull
Sure.
out a giant fish for dinner? That's going to completely depend on how much time you've got left with the sun, and that's a fairly decent way to check it.
Yeah, or if you're hoofing on the road, I guess that's an easy way to figure out between that and your ranger beads. You probably know exactly how far you can go before sundown, right?
That's a really good point. And yes, you can, if you know your pace count and you know how long it's been since you started, you
Mm-hmm.
can get a pretty decent idea of how far you're going to make it.
Yeah, that's awesome because hey, I've got 7 fingers left, so I got an hour 45, and I know that I'm going exactly, whatever it is, 2.3 miles an hour, Marine Corps hump speed, hoorah, or something like that. You could figure out exactly how far you're gonna go before the sun goes down pretty easily at that point.
And you can determine if it's going to be a safe place to bed down if needed. Because
Yeah,
you may want to cut yourself short rather than trying to set up in the dark or set up in a valley that's, prone to flash flooding or something like that.
yeah,
It's a safety measure too.
yeah. That's really cool. That's awesome. So I'm gonna go a completely different direction, and we're going high tech here. But if you are in an urban area, even not an urban area, but if there are buildings anywhere around you, a very simple trick to figure out what direction you're headed, whether it's daylight or pitch black middle of the night, or you can't see the stars or anything, is simply looking at the roofs of homes. And Dish TV and Direct TV, the main dish providers, same with Dish Internet, which is actually HughesNet, I think. All of those satellites are geostationary over the equator, meaning that they stay in the same place over the planet as we're spinning along at however many thousands of miles an hour. And so in the northern hemisphere, all of those satellite dishes on top of homes are always pointed south, always. And in the southern hemisphere, all of those satellite dishes are always pointed north. They always point to the equator. Now, when you go down to Central America or somewhere like Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, they point almost straight up in the air because they're pointed straight up at the satellite. But it doesn't really, as long as you know what hemisphere you are in, you can look at the roof of any building, and if they've got a satellite TV dish, you can generally know that those are always going to be pointed towards a geostationary satellite over the equator. So northern hemisphere, you see the top of a building, there's a satellite. Now, obviously, there's a lot of point-to-point mesh stuff out there, but if it says Direct TV on it or Dish TV or, HughesNet or something like that, those are always going to be pointed south. And so then you know which way north is. So that's an easy one.
Does that also apply to the one that fell off my neighbor's roof and is just laying in their backyard?
Well, yeah, if they're still getting reception, then actually, yes, it does apply.
All right, then.
Yeah. Now, it does not apply to Starlink. Starlink satellites are different because they have this big, weird constellation where they've got basically a mesh network of satellites. So where we, in the northern hemisphere, they're usually going to be pointed either northwest or southwest, but there's really no way to know based on your area where those things are going to be pointed. In my area, my Starlink satellite points northwest-ish, but that's not a good rule of thumb. I would not navigate via, the little Starlink dishes, but all of the DirecTV type stuff. Now, another one, if you don't have DirecTV, is solar panels. Same exact way. Solar panels always point towards the sun. So for the most part, they're going to be on the south side of a building. Almost always. If you look up and you see solar panels. Now, there are fancy ones that will track the diurnal cycle of the sun, so they're on a pivot or a pan and tilt of some kind. And then lots of times people will have solar panels on maybe three sides of a building because as the sun comes up and then it sets, it follows the whole cycle. But if there's only solar panels on one elevation of a roof, chances are those solar panels are going to be pointed south if you're in the northern hemisphere. So that's an easy one too. You just look up and say there's solar panel, whether it's it could be a regular electricity generating solar panel or a hot water heater type thing, a solar hot water heater. Any of those things always going to be pointed south on a building. So that's a pretty easy one to look up and say, hey, I see a TV dish or I see a solar panel. You're going to immediately know which direction you're traveling.
Now, I know you kind of have a commercial building fetish, if you will. Does it apply to commercial buildings too?
That's a really good point. Now, if it is TV, yes. If it is solar, generally yes. But like in a flat top building, it's sometimes hard to see the top of what's going on up there. Lots of times if you have a building that's got a big flat top, then you might not be able to see the solar panels from the ground. But keep in mind that generally on a lot of commercial buildings, especially in busy high-tech areas, industrial areas, things like that, there may be a lot of other satellite dishes because in larger cities, a lot of emergency services will use point-to-point. Some of banking will use point-to-point. And so you'll just have a dish up there like a Yagi antenna or a satellite dish, a satellite-looking dish, and it's not necessarily like a TV dish pointing at a geostationary or geosynchronous satellite. It might be pointing towards another building or something like that. So this is more for the Direct TV, the Dish TV, the Viasat, the HughesNet, those kinds of dishes that you would find anywhere, whether it's an apartment building or a commercial building or a residential building. but you can get confused with some of the other antennas on industrial buildings and commercial buildings because sometimes they're using a point-to-point network for something else and you don't know what it's for. But yeah, generally speaking, solar, yeah, pretty much always going to point south.
And I will say from experience with this, there are different bands of satellite communication. So you
Sure.
might see a dish that has like a pigtail coming out of it, and it's a really stiff coil that just kind of points where the dish is pointing.
Hmm.
That's a polarized dish. So it's actually it is for communication. It's basically spinning a radio signal if you want to think of it that way. So it's
Oh, yeah.
only going one direction. But those are also used for microwave, which is that point to point. So if you see
Yep.
one with a pigtail or a movable base, like if you can see that that satellite is able to easily be moved, it's not in a fixed position, possibly something to get away from,
Right.
as far as determining your direction, just because it's going to be very hit or miss on those ones.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. Look for the dish network. Dish almost always points to the equator. It's pointing over the equator. The closer you get to the equator, the more straight up and down they're going to point, and the further south in the southern hemisphere you go, the more north they're going to point. So looking for those direct TV and dish TV type antennas, that's the way to go. But yeah, you can look up anywhere and be like, "Yep, I know exactly which way south is because it's the direction that TV antenna is pointed."
So for only $27.99 a month or whatever their subscription fee is, you can determine what direction it
Yep.
is, or
That's
go get
right.
a compass.
Right. That's right. But yeah, being, if you happen to be, if you're stuck in an urban environment and you're just trying to figure out which way north is, it's very easy to do that by just looking up at the buildings and kind of seeing which direction of the TV dish is pointed, which direction of the solar panels pointed.
I like it.
Cool.
So what do we do if the lights are out? Sun is down, don't have any reference to the sun. Well, now we're talking about celestial navigation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I know you've got a lot more experience with this, so correct me if I'm wrong. In the northern hemisphere, you're going to be looking for the North Star or
Right.
Polaris.
Polaris is the real scientific name of the North Star. Yeah, that's right.
And if you can find the Big Dipper or Ursa Major, the Big Bear,
The Big
you
Bear.
can find Polaris.
Yep, that's
So
right.
if you and this is where it gets a little fuzzy for me. If you find the Big Dipper, it looks like a big saucepan in the sky. If you take away from the handle the far edge of the pan, if you will, and you'll see two fairly bright stars. If you go 5 times that distance between those stars, so just straight line from those two, 5 times that distance, that is your North Star.
Yep, they call them the pointer stars, and that's exactly right. You're going to see the North Star. And I think one of the common misconceptions, one of the dad facts out there when I was a kid, is everybody just said, "Oh yeah, the North Star. It's always the brightest star in the sky." And that's just not the case because so many planets are visible often that if that was the only tool you were using, said, "Oh, it's just the brightest star in the sky is always going to be the North Star," then yeah, it could be Venus, it could be Mars, it could be Jupiter at certain times of the year. And so it's not the brightest star. It's that one that, yeah, the handle of the two pointer stars in the Big Dipper. And you can look this up online and we'll put like a good graphic or a reference or some kind of Wikipedia entry link to it of how to find this. But yeah, if you use the pointer stars uh, in the Big Dipper, they always point to Polaris, which is the North Star, and that is always north. Now, obviously, you can't see that from the southern hemisphere, right? I don't think you can. I don't think you can see that. I think the Big Dipper is always a northern hemisphere thing, right?
Yeah, I think in the southern hemisphere, you have to look for the Southern Cross, which I can't remember if it's 5 stars or is it 6?
Yeah, I don't know. The Southern Cross constellation is the other one, right? So in the southern hemisphere, and again, we'll put some links to that, but that's another way. There is another celestial constellation in the southern hemisphere that will always point south when you're in the southern hemisphere and you can't see the North Star or Ursa Major.
And I have seen a couple of things on YouTube. I don't know if they're completely true, but if you are on the equator at night you can actually see both the Southern Cross and Polaris.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess I don't see why not. Yeah, that probably makes sense. It probably depends on the time of year. But yeah, so you would be able to kind of fact check yourself there.
And there are going to be times and cases where you've got cloud cover, you've got fog, you've got something that you
Yep.
can't see the sky, you can't see the sun clearly, you can't see the stars clearly. You've got to still navigate. So, what do you do then? And this is where having knowledge of your prominent landmarks and terrain features like mountains, rivers, valleys, something to orient yourself. This is that dead reckoning skill that we talked about in episode 15.
Yeah, sure.
This is where having that MyTopo map, just have it on your wall while you're sitting there, in the office. If you pin it to your cubicle wall, just kind of look at where you are, look at the stuff that's around you, whether it's a big urban center or a lake or a mountain, something around you, and get your bearings to it, because that can really, if you can identify that mountain from wherever you are, you can get a general direction. When we lived in Colorado Springs, it was really easy to tell which way was north because the mountains were always on the west and you could
Yeah,
always
that's
see the mountains.
yeah, exactly. You know, in the West Coast too, right? You can look at the Cascade Mountain Range, and as long as you know which mountain it is, you can orient yourself pretty well off a mountain. Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. So give me some other ones. There's got to be some other ones. We can't see the satellite dishes. We can't see the stars. I can't see the sun. There's still got to be some ways to figure out what's north just by looking around your surroundings, right?
Let's talk about some stuff that's a little closer to the ground.
Okay.
So, vegetation. If you are looking at how vegetation grows, in the northern hemisphere, moss is going to oftentimes grow thicker on the north side of trees. And that's because it has more moisture because it doesn't get baked off by the midday sun. Moss loves moisture and cool temperatures, so it's going to stay on that opposite side of the tree.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And I guess I've always heard like, oh yeah, moss always grows on the north side only on the north side. That's not true, but it's going to grow. It's going to be more prominent. It's going to be thicker on the north side of a tree if it happens to have moss all the way around, right?
Exactly. And it's also, there's a difference between moss and lichen. So moss is the super fuzzy, I like to touch it, it makes me
Mm-hmm.
feel good. That's moss. Lichen is going to feel like a lizard. It's going to feel dry, scaly. A lot of the time, it almost feels like very fine tree bark or rocks that you're chipping off.
Oh yeah.
Lichen will grow on both sides, but it can have the same colors as moss. So just kind of feel it. And I don't know that there is a toxic lichen or a toxic moss that you can touch it and get poisoned or anything like that. So they're going to be pretty safe to touch. If you are really down on your luck, there's no moss to be found anywhere. You can always look at what the animals are doing. Deer, they tend to bed down on south facing slopes. A lot of the time, coyotes, if you do see a coyote laying down, it has it will lay down in a east west, so it's facing west because that's the predominant winds.
Hmm.
Coyotes will almost always face towards the predominant winds when they're sleeping, so if they do catch something coming off the wind, they can be alerted to it. So you can actually sneak up on coyotes in cornfields if you're approaching from the opposite side, from the
Oh,
downwind side.
that's interesting. Yeah, and I have heard the deer in the at least in the morning they'll bed down kind of south facing into the into the into the sun, right? So yeah, that's an interesting one too. So I've got some weirder ones. Now these are things that maybe people have heard of, maybe they haven't, but um the interstate route numbering system I think is kind of cool. Like that's one that a lot of people don't know this, but interstate highways, the routes with odd numbers run north to south. So, like Interstate 5 runs north to south, 405, 205, 105, whatever, those run north to south. And the even numbered interstate highways, they run east west, like I 80, I 84, I 90, things like that. And so, for the north south routes, the lowest numbers begin in the west. So the furthest west highway is I-5. And the lowest numbered east east-west routes start in the south. So like I-10 is down south, and I-80 and I-84 and I-90 are up north. So if you just happen to find yourself on an interstate highway and you see a number, you know which direction you are and relatively what part of the country you're in just by seeing the number of that road sign. So that's kind of cool.
I like that. And I know there's something with spurs and bypasses and like they'll
I
have different numbers and stuff like that, the
I
3-digit numbers, but
Yeah, I think there is a whole. I mean, I think you can get a lot more deep into it. I think it makes sense. I think that system, the interstate highway system, actually, I think it was put together to actually make a little bit of sense. So yeah, that's kind of a cool one.
the other thing I like about the interstate system is if you can identify what interstate you're on and find a mile marker, if you know which direction you're headed, east, west, north, south,
Hmm.
if you find a mile marker, you know exactly how far from the border you are.
Yeah, that's right. You know how far from the state border you are, so you don't need a sign to a city or anything like that. If you're somewhere where you're completely unfamiliar with where you are, yeah, if you just find a interstate highway sign with the little yardstick on it, just the number, the mileage marker, then you would know how far you are from the state border. And you have a pretty good idea which direction you're headed. Pretty good idea of where you are located in the country. If you just drop somebody off in a blindfold and all they had was an interstate marker sign, you you would have a fairly good idea of where you are with this knowledge. Now, one other one that's kind of interesting, and I bet a lot of people don't know this because it's only in certain cities. But if it is your city, you should know that in some cities, the streets will run east to west and the avenues will run north to south. Manhattan Island in New York is like this, that if you are on a street, these streets will run east west, and they call them avenues when those streets run north south.
That's how you can get like I'm on the corner of 30th and 30th.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's why
Oh,
that
that
doesn't
makes
make
my
sense.
brain melt.
It's crazy. That makes no sense to us. But Portland, Oregon is the exact same way. That in Portland, the streets head that they are north south, or sorry, the streets are east west, and the avenues are north south. So if you know that your city is set up like that, then yeah, there's kind of a cool way to just figure out exactly where you are and which direction you're headed fairly easily.
That's kind of wild. I never really put that together that you could determine,
Yeah.
where you are based on that. Because I know a lot of the city I grew up in, you could determine how far away you were from another street because um, the center line was kind of your 0 point.
Mm.
And if you were, it was either north or south. So if you were on like 96th Street, if you were at 820 South 96th, then you were a, just shy of a mile south of the center line of the city. Whereas if you were at
Really?
1180, now you're further away from the center line. And uh, like if you had a 10426 Lancaster Lane or something like that, that meant it was on Lancaster Lane near 104th.
Interesting.
So that's how a lot of the addresses in the city that I grew up in, that's how a lot of them worked. When you get into some of the weird residential, like loop to loop, crazy
Mhm.
neighborhoods, it all falls apart. But for the main thoroughfares, that was pretty easy to get my head around as a kid.
Yeah. That's kinda interesting. Hey, do you know this is a dad fact because I don't know if it's true, is the most common, street name in the United States. Do you know what it is?
Isn't it like second
It's
or something like
second.
that?
It's second because first was often renamed Broadway or, Main Street or something like that, and Second Street is the most common street name.
I say we just give everybody grid coordinates and call it good.
Right. We just give them grid coordinates and call it good. Yeah. So, it's funny, this probably end up being kind of a short episode, but I just thought that was kind of cool. Like, if you think about all these other ways just to navigate, and it'd be really cool if anybody else has any that they could send in like this, because I bet there's no way, we're thinking of all of them. But yeah, there's different ways to navigate. I'm sure there's a bunch. I was trying to. Oh, I got one for you. This is a fun one. Is airports. If you are on an airport, the airport runway number, that is always going to be the magnetic heading of the runway. So runway 31 is always going to be at 310 degrees, or runway 27 is always going to be 270. It's always going to point west, and then naturally the runway number on the other end of it will be exactly 180 degrees out. It'll be 18 off of that. So, it'd be runway 1 and runway 19, if that makes sense.
It does, and I never realized that. I
Yep.
know something that you can do if you're in an emergency situation, if you've got just a sewing needle, like a
Mm-hmm.
regular metal sewing needle,
Yep.
and a piece of silk. If you
Mm-hmm.
rub that sewing needle against the silk, it will actually magnetize it. And if you just drop it onto a leaf uh, that's floating in still water, obviously you
Mm-hmm.
don't want to do it on the ocean that's chopping and
Yeah.
you're going to lose your needle faster than shit. But uh, if you can find like a small pond, put in a silk magnetized needle on a leaf and drop it into the water, it will point north. So you
Yeah.
can get a reference point.
Right.
And then, are you familiar with something called a sunstone?
No, huh?
So this is, like I said, this is going back way old school Viking era. But in the northern hemisphere, especially when you get up into Norway, Finland, Iceland, where you had a lot of these Viking tribes,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of cloud cover, and
Sure.
it lasts a lot of the year.
Yep.
It's always
Yep.
foggy and overcast. England is the same way. So they would take a piece of quartz and hold it up to the sun, and even through cloud cover, that quartz would amplify the sunlight so that they could do the shadow stick method in a bucket full of water.
Wow, that's interesting. So it amplifies the sunlight enough. I mean, almost like the magnifying glass. It amplifies the sunlight enough that even with cloud cover, you could do the rudimentary sundial thing. That's crazy.
And they would literally do the stick shadow method in a bucket full of water and determine, do we need to steer more right or more left? Because they knew they were trying to go west so they could go raiding and pillaging
Sure.
and plundering.
Yeah,
But if they go too far north or too far south, they're going to miss their target.
that's
So
crazy.
they just did it based on, do we go more left, more right? Which way are we steering, port or starboard? And that's how they ended up getting to England. I think the show Vikings actually portrayed that pretty well. But yeah, it's
Wow.
documented that that's one of the ways they navigated. They could even
That's
do
kind
it
of
by
cool.
moonlight.
Yeah, that's really cool. Now, I have heard that the needle trick before. We actually did that. I remember in grade school, and we magnetized the end of the needle. I think, yeah, we're maybe rubbing it on fabric. Obviously, if you have a magnet, you just have to rub the end of that needle on a magnet, and it will magnetize itself pretty quickly. And then you could we put it through a wine cork. Just pushed that needle through a wine cork and just put it in anything, a cup of water, and could make a rudimentary compass, and that magnetized end of that needle would point north. That's a pretty easy one.
So maybe that's something to add into your EDC kit.
Maybe it is. Yeah. Well, remember the guys at Shomertech, they actually have that pre-magnetized little button compass. Like for the person that's too lazy to carry the real compass, it's literally just this little button-sized thing that is pre-magnetized, and it's not just giving you cardinal directions. It's giving you, the whole actual compass rose on there, and all you need to do is just slowly drop that onto any still water away from, ferrous metallic objects, and that compass will give you all of your directions right there. And it's, dude, you buy one of those, you just, yeah, it's like a button size, and you would never ever notice that you have it. That's pretty amazing.
And it does float, right?
I think it
It's not
I think
all
it
metal. It
does.
actually floats.
I think I'm not sure if it is all metal or not. I think it may just have, maybe it has just a little air pocket when you dump it in there, when you push it in there. Like maybe it's rounded. I don't know if the material is all metal or not, but it does float. I do know that. Yeah, that's kind of a I mean, it's just cool. It's just that little buttony compass, and you don't know you have it till you need it. That's really cool. I mean, having one of those, that saves you all this bullshit with satellite dishes and solar panels and stuff.
It saves you the grumpy neighbor. What are you doing
Right.
looking at my satellite
Yeah,
dish?
yeah,
Get
exactly.
off
Yeah,
my
yeah.
lawn.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it saves you all that stuff. So yeah, just have the compass. Now, one other thing, let's say technology fails. Um, your cell phone obviously has a not, I think they call it a magnetometer built in or something. But it has it has a rudimentary compass. If for some reason that doesn't work in your cell phone, offline maps are another very cool thing. We've talked about that. There's a couple of different offline maps you can buy, and there are, just in your Google Maps app, you can actually choose to download. It takes obviously some amount of data, but you can choose to download offline maps. So having offline maps just built into your cell phone, if you're gonna, if you're where you normally live and where you normally operate, then just downloading those offline map sets so they're there if the cell network goes down, or if you're going to go travel, if you're going on vacation, being able to just say, hey, I'm going to go to this city, I'm going to go to my Google Maps app, and I'm just going to download the offline maps for this area. That's a very simple, easy thing to do. And then, assuming if your cell phone has power, it doesn't need the cell network, and you could still navigate using just your cell phone and those offline maps. So that's another really cool way to do it as well.
And this is a lot of kind of very quickly right in your face
Yeah.
land navigation with this. But
Yep.
this is one of those things, having knowledge of your area. So if you're in a familiar area, you know and can use your knowledge of landmarks, trails, certain buildings,
Yep.
anything like that. Just kind of open your eyes and look around and
Yep.
get used to your surroundings, because none of these methods that we have given you are going to provide precise coordinates.
That's right.
You don't We haven't gotten to the point, as far as I know, where you can just hold up your hand without anything in it and it gives you your coordinates. We're not quite there, I
But
don't think.
you make a valid point about just knowing this stuff beforehand. This is the simplest knowledge, right? Is go get yourself a MyTopo map. Go use our link. Go get a MyTopo map of your local area, and just like I have one right now that I'm looking at on my wall, and I just have that for my local area, and I'm just familiarizing myself all the time with just the local roads instructions, things like this. And you think about anytime you've ever watched like a police chase on TV, and you listen to that radio traffic, think about what the cops do, where he's like, we're turning right on fourth, we're turning left on second, we're turning right, and we're headed west on this highway, we're to east, we're turning east now. And that's just all in their head, because that's what they do all the time. And I'm really enamored when I see that, because you've got somebody who's driving a car in a high stress environment, and you watch these cops and they're just like, we're making a west turn onto fifth, we're making a north turn. Like, I can't do that in my neighborhood, because I'm not thinking like that. But if you start thinking like that, if you're studying that local area and you have the idea, then it does become second nature. And that's really cool to watch when you see people that's what they do for a living. It's pretty impressive, because yeah, they know every single turn they take, and they know exactly what direction they're headed. I can't do that right now. And in my neighborhood that I've lived for a decade.
And that's where practicing all of these techniques in
That's right.
familiar areas before you have to rely on them in an unfamiliar situation, that
Yep.
can be truly life-saving. So if you are going to go out and practice these, I mean, you can go to your city park, you can go to your backyard, you can go
Hmm.
out camping, whatever you want, but just be sure to always prioritize safety, avoid unnecessary risks. Don't try to do this while you're driving. Don't just stare off into the abyss of your city looking for satellite dishes, pay attention to the road, but
Right.
have an idea, when I'm driving to work, am I headed generally north? Am I going north and then west?
Yep.
Where am I going? And if you can kind of get used to that in your head, in your daily life, be able to identify your general directions in your city, you're going to be a step ahead when it comes to something bad happening.
Yeah, that's exactly right. No, that's awesome. So, I do think we can wrap this one up a little early, but a couple of things I want to touch on real quick, just housekeeping items. One, I want to make sure everybody knows we maintain a website, stakeholderprepping.com, where every single episode has a blog post. And if we're mentioning products, that product is likely going to make it into the blog, and it's going to have a link to where you can find that product. If it's any kind of just the knowledge or articles we reference or things like that, we're going to have a link to that kind of stuff on the blog. And then if you scroll down, you've got the list of the discounts that we've secured specifically for our listeners. Most of them have a code with the exception of MyTopo. MyTopo is just a click-through link. And yeah, check out MyTopo. That's very specific to the navigation episodes like this. But getting a map of your local area and all that kind of stuff, check that out. I like them. It's really cool. I like the custom map. Having a custom map that's centered on your address, your office, that's really cool. And then obviously contingency medical still, you go there. I think is that I think that's code stakeholder. But anyway, it's listed in the blog, right? Stakeholder 10. Is that what it is?
Right.
Stakeholder 10, and that gives you $10 off at contingency medical. And then obviously our friends at Grim, go to Grim Workshop, Grim Survival, and that's just code prepping there, and you get 10% off for using our code. And then lastly, we talked about this a couple episodes ago, our friends at Off the Grid Concepts, we have secured a 15% discount on all of their Kydex holsters. And they are all custom, but a lot of them are on the shelf, meaning that you're not going to have to wait 3 weeks for a holster. Even some pretty kind of particular stuff. Like I bought one from them, and it was literally, I wanted a SIG 229 with a threaded barrel and a specific light on it and an optic cutout. And they cranked that out pretty quick because he's got all that stuff there, all of their, custom, blue guns or whatever. So yeah, if you go to Off the Grid Concepts, again, we've got their link, and use code prepping, that's 15% off on holsters and everything. You could send them your knife and they do a custom Kydex holster for your knife, but all kinds of really cool Kydex holsters for, any firearm you can think of.
I haven't ordered it yet, but I did kind of build a custom order on there just to see how much it was going to be
Yep.
for a new competition holster with
Yeah, what'd you think price wise compared to other custom Kydex places?
I have gotten custom work done before,
Yeah.
and it was another $50 to $75 on top of what they're asking, and it was not great quality when I got it done.
No kidding, really.
So for a 3 mag holster for my offside, and then a speed draw competition 3-gun holster for my dominant side, yeah, I'm pretty much committed. I just need to find the right competition around here.
Yeah, I do need there's one pistol. I've got a VP9, an HK VP9 that I need a holster for, and I'm definitely gonna go grab one of those. They've got the cool like kind of fabric covered Kydex, and then the felt lined, so you're not gonna scratch your gun or anything. But yeah, dude, they're awesome. And there's a couple other companies that I'm not going to talk bad about, but I have purchased Kydex holsters custom. I'm using air quotes. They say they're custom, but I've purchased Kydex holsters from a couple other companies, and I will tell you that the quality from Off the Grid is just exponentially better. I mean, it's true craftsmanship that goes into that. And what I really like is they have that custom sweat guard type design. So you can say, hey, this is going to be an inside the waistband, and I usually don't wear a t-shirt, so I want a high sweat guard. Or it's going to be outside the waistband, and I'm always wearing a t-shirt, so I can get away with a low cut sweat guard, so I'm not getting gunk into the firearm, things like that. So anyway, check out Off the Grid. I dig those guys, and we've got a link. It's like otghex.com or something, right? Is that right?
Yep, OTG
Yeah.
Hex.
Yep.
And 15% off, you really cannot beat that. I think
Yep.
that's one of those things where we reached out to them, we talked to them, and they hooked us up big time with
Yeah,
15%.
I didn't expect that at all. So no, I'm definitely gonna go spend my own money on that just because they really did take care of us. I mean, there's nowhere else that you're gonna find 15% off of stuff. So that was awesome. I was really impressed with that. Um, and then and then lastly, Chris, I think, do you want to tease next week? Because this is next week's a banger, dude.
I have been waiting for this part of the episode all episode.
Just I don't know how much I want to say, but I'm ridiculously impressed that we managed to secure like a real famous person guest who's been on like TV and has like things named after them.
I'm going to go ahead and say it.
Okay.
Joe Flowers.
The Joe Flowers. And if you don't know Joe Flowers, if you don't know him, and you know, if you Google Joe Flowers bushcraft, you will find Joe Flowers. And dude, he's such a great guy, really fun to talk to. And he has some, custom Grimm cards, like the Joe Flowers edition Grimm cards. He's developed and designed a bunch of knives for like real companies like Tops and Condor. I mean, just a great guy. But I'm really looking forward to this because there's a lot of these, and I've mentioned this before, that there's a lot of just parallels between bushcrafting and prepping. But who really knows where those intersect? Because I think a lot of people that consider themselves preppers are probably not going out in the backyard and building like an Amish table. So, where are those skills you need
I don't
as a
have
prepper?
them.
I don't have them. I don't have them. And so it's the tools, the skills, the knowledge, and all that. And we're going to bring Joe Flowers on, and he's going to tell us about all of those kinds of things. Where does the prepping and the bushcrafting kind of come together? So I could not be more excited about next week's episode.
Yep. Next week is going to be awesome because we have the premier bushcrafter, Joe Flowers, coming on. He's a super down to earth guy.
Yeah.
It'll be a ton of fun, and you will learn a lot by listening to that episode. But you don't get it until next week. So
That's right.
be sure to tune in then.
Yep.
Until then, remember, you are your own stakeholder.